In the heart of London, where history meets modernity, stands one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, Buckingham Palace. Every day, thousands of tourists flock to this grand estate, eager to catch a glimpse of royalty, or simply soak in the rich traditions that define British culture. Among these traditions, none is more striking than the sight of the Queen's Guard, resolute and unwavering, standing tall as living symbols of discipline and honor. On this particular sunny afternoon, Private James Whittaker was one of those guards. Dressed in his signature scarlet tunic and towering bearskin hat, he stood like a statue outside the palace gates. His polished boots gleamed under the sunlight, and his posture was impeccable, back straight, shoulders squared, and chin held high. To the casual observer, he seemed almost otherworldly, untouched by time or distraction. This was exactly how it was meant to be. The Queen's Guard wasn't just a ceremonial role. It was a sacred duty, steeped in centuries of tradition. Tourists swarmed around him, their cameras clicking incessantly. Children pointed at him with wide eyes, while adults whispered stories about the legendary stoicism of the guards. Some tried playful antics, waving hands in front of his face or making silly faces, hoping to elicit even the slightest reaction. But James didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Years of training had taught him to block out distractions and maintain his composure no matter what happened around him. It was a skill that required immense focus, patience, and mental strength. As the crowd ebbed and flowed, James remained rooted to his spot, his mind calm despite the commotion. Occasionally, he would shift his gaze subtly, scanning the area for anything unusual. Though his expression betrayed nothing, he was always alert, always aware. His job wasn't just about standing still, it was about ensuring safety, protecting the monarchy, and upholding the dignity of his position. Even though the days could be long and monotonous, James took pride in his work. He knew that every moment he spent on duty contributed to something much larger than himself. The atmosphere was lively but peaceful, filled with laughter, chatter, and the occasional gasp of awe. Families posed for photos with James in the background, framing him perfectly within their snapshots. Street performers entertained nearby, adding to the festive vibe. Everything seemed normal, routine even. Little did anyone know, however, that this tranquil scene was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would test not only James's resolve, but also the limits of public decency. Unbeknownst to James, a group of rowdy tourists was making its way through the crowd. They were loud, boisterous, and clearly enjoying themselves a little too much. What started as harmless banter soon turned into something far more reckless, and when they locked eyes on the steadfast guard, an idea sparked among them. An idea that would disrupt the harmony of the moment and set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. The group of tourists causing a stir in the crowd was hard to miss. There were 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed casually in bright, mismatched outfits that screamed out-of-towners. They had spent the better part of their day exploring London's most famous landmarks, hopping from one attraction to the next with boundless energy. By now, they were exhausted but still riding high on the excitement of being in such an iconic city. Unfortunately, their enthusiasm had taken a turn for the worse after stopping at a nearby pub earlier in the afternoon. Over pints of beer and hearty laughter, the group had indulged freely, letting loose in a way that felt liberating at first, but quickly spiraled into recklessness. Their inhibitions lowered with each drink, and by the time they reached Buckingham Palace, their behavior had become increasingly boisterous. They stumbled through the throngs of people, cracking jokes and drawing attention to themselves with loud, exaggerated gestures. Some passers-by chuckled at their antics, while others exchanged irritated glances, clearly unimpressed by their lack of decorum. It didn't take long for the group to notice Private James Whittaker standing tall and motionless near the palace gates. At first, they marveled at his stoic presence, snapping photos like everyone else. But soon, their admiration turned into mischief. One of the men nudged his friends, pointing at James. "Look at him," he slurred, grinning widely. Doesn't even blink. Bet we could mess with him, and he wouldn't do a thing. His comment sparked a ripple of laughter among the group. Emboldened by alcohol and fueled by a misguided sense of humor, they began conspiring. The woman pulled out her phone, eager to capture whatever prank they came up with. Another man suggested tying something around him. Just for fun, he insisted, as if trying to justify their growing audacity. Before anyone could think twice, they spotted some discarded ropes lying near a construction site nearby. Without hesitation, they grabbed them, giggling like children about to pull off the ultimate prank. As they approached James, their intentions became clear. The crowd around them started to thin instinctively, sensing that something wasn't right. A few bystanders shook their heads disapprovingly, muttering under their breath about respect and common decency. But the tourists weren't listening. To them, this was just another adventure, another story to tell back home. They circled James, laughing and shouting, completely oblivious to the weight of what they were doing. James, meanwhile, remained utterly still, his face a mask of calm determination. Inside, though, his mind raced. He knew protocol dictated that he stay motionless unless directly threatened or in immediate danger. But as the ropes appeared and the group closed in, tension began to build, not just within James, but among the onlookers who watched helplessly, unsure of how far this reckless game would go. What started as harmless curiosity had morphed into something darker, more dangerous, setting the stage for a confrontation no one saw coming. The group of tourists wasted no time putting their reckless plan into action. With ropes in hand, they began circling Private James Whittaker like predators closing in on their prey. Their laughter echoed loudly, cutting through the otherwise peaceful atmosphere around Buckingham Palace. The woman held her phone up, ready to record the moment, while the three men worked together to tie the ropes around James. Each loop of the rope tightened slightly, pulling him closer to the ornate iron pole behind him. To the onlookers, it was surreal. One moment, they had been admiring the stoic guard as a symbol of tradition and discipline, and the next, they were witnessing something deeply unsettling. Some people gasped audibly, their hands flying to their mouths in shock. Others stepped back, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. A few brave souls called out, urging the group to stop. "Leave him alone," one man shouted, his voice firm but tinged with fear. But the tourists ignored him completely, too caught up in their own chaotic game to care. James, for his part, remained frozen in place, his expression unchanged despite the growing tension. Inside, however, his mind was racing. He could feel the coarse texture of the rope pressing against his uniform, hear the jeers and taunts of the drunken tourists, and sense the unease rippling through the crowd. Every instinct told him to break free, to defend himself or push back against this blatant disrespect. But years of rigorous training kicked in, reminding him of the rules he had sworn to uphold. Unless there was an immediate threat to his safety, he was not allowed to react. So he stood there, enduring the humiliation silently, trusting that help would come soon. As the ropes tightened further, pinning him firmly to the pole, the tourists erupted into cheers, congratulating themselves on their brilliant prank. One of them even mock-saluted James, laughing hysterically at his own joke. The woman holding the phone panned around, capturing reactions from the horrified onlookers. Her grin never faltered, even as she noticed the disapproval etched on the faces of those watching. For the group, this was just another lighthearted escapade, a story they'd boast about later, but for everyone else, it was a disturbing breach of respect and dignity. The mood among the crowd shifted rapidly. What had started as mild irritation turned into palpable anger. Parents ushered their children away, shielding them from the spectacle. An elderly couple exchanged worried glances, muttering about how times had changed for the worse. Someone yelled, "Call the police," while another person frantically dialed emergency services on their phone. The once jovial scene outside the palace now felt tense and volatile, as if it might explode at any moment. Despite the mounting chaos, James continued to stand tall, refusing to let his composure crack. His eyes remained fixed ahead, focused on a distant point beyond the tourists and the crowd. To anyone watching, he seemed almost superhuman in his ability to endure the situation without flinching. Yet beneath his calm exterior, he couldn't help but wonder how far things would escalate before someone intervened. Little did he, or the unruly group, realize that help was already on its way, summoned by a fellow sentry who had been observing the scene unfold from a nearby post. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, one that would test not only James's resolve, but also the limits of public tolerance. As the ropes bound him tighter to the pole, the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but one thing was certain: this day would not end quietly. As the ropes tightened around Private James Whittaker, binding him to the iron pole, panic began to ripple through the crowd like a wave. The once cheerful atmosphere had transformed into something tense and uneasy, with murmurs of disbelief and outrage spreading among the onlookers. Parents clutched their children closer, shielding them from the scene unfolding before their eyes. Some tourists lowered their cameras, no longer eager to capture memories. They were too stunned by what they were witnessing. An elderly woman in a floral dress stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "Please stop this," she pleaded, her voice trembling but firm. She reached out as if to intervene, only to be met with a dismissive shove from one of the drunken men. Stumbling backward, she was quickly caught by another bystander who pulled her to safety. Her shocked expression said it all. This wasn't just harmless fun anymore. It was a blatant act of disrespect that crossed every line of decency. Others in the crowd tried reasoning with the group, begging them to untie James and leave him alone. "This isn't right," shouted a young man wearing a backpack, his hands clenched into fists. "You're humiliating him." But the tourists seemed impervious to reason. Their laughter grew louder, almost defiant, as if daring anyone to challenge them further. One of the men even taunted the crowd, waving mockingly at those who dared speak up. It was clear they were intoxicated not just by alcohol, but also by their own audacity, completely detached from the gravity of their actions. Meanwhile, people began recording the incident on their phones, capturing every detail for the world to see. While some filmed with the intention of documenting wrongdoing, others did so out of sheer fascination, unable to look away from the surreal spectacle. Social media would soon amplify the story, turning it into a global conversation about respect, accountability, and cultural sensitivity. But for now, the focus remained on the immediate crisis unfolding outside Buckingham Palace. Amidst the chaos, a few brave individuals attempted to step in more directly. A burly man with a thick beard pushed his way through the crowd, his jaw set in determination. "Untie him right now," he demanded, stepping between James and the unruly group. For a moment, it looked like things might escalate physically. The tourists hesitated, their smirks faltering as they realized they were outnumbered. But then the woman in the group stepped forward, holding her phone aloft. "Back off, or I'll film you too," she threatened, her tone laced with false bravado. The bearded man paused, realizing that provoking a physical altercation might only make matters worse. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Every second felt like an eternity, as though time itself had slowed down to highlight the absurdity of the situation. People whispered urgently to one another, debating whether to call for help or take matters into their own hands. Some suggested alerting palace security, while others insisted the police needed to be involved immediately. Fingers flew across phone screens as emergency numbers were dialed, and voices rose above the din, pleading for assistance. Despite the mounting pressure from the crowd, the tourists showed no signs of stopping. They continued laughing and cheering, oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. To them, this was still just a prank, a cruel joke meant to entertain themselves. But to everyone else, it was a violation of everything the Queen's Guard represented: honor, tradition, and unwavering dedication. And while James stood silently, enduring the ordeal with remarkable composure, The collective anger of the crowd grew stronger with each passing moment. Unbeknownst to the group, their antics had already drawn the attention of authorities. Nearby sentries stationed at different posts had been monitoring the situation closely, quietly coordinating a response. Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder with every second. Help was on the way, but for now, the crowd held its breath, waiting to see how far the situation would spiral before order could be restored. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Heads turned toward the sound as the first responders arrived with impressive speed. 2 police motorcycles roared into view, weaving expertly through the thick crowd that had gathered around Buckingham Palace. The officers dismounted in one fluid motion, their uniforms crisp and authoritative, instantly commanding attention. Behind them, a black van screeched to a halt, its doors swinging open to reveal a team of armed Metropolitan Police officers, their presence both imposing and reassuring. The unruly tourists, who moments earlier had been laughing and jeering without a care in the world, suddenly froze. Their bravado faltered as they realized the gravity of the situation. One of the men dropped the rope he'd been holding, his hands instinctively rising in surrender. The woman lowered her phone, her smug grin melting into wide-eyed panic. For the first time since their reckless prank began, they seemed to comprehend that this wasn't just a harmless joke. It was a serious offense with real consequences. The commanding officer stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Step away from the guard," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. His words carried weight, silencing the murmurs of the crowd and drawing all eyes to them. The tourists hesitated for a split second before stumbling backward, their movements clumsy and uncertain. They looked at each other nervously, searching for some semblance of a plan, but there was none to be found. Within seconds, they were surrounded by law enforcement, their escape routes completely cut off. Meanwhile, another group of officers approached Private James Whittaker with deliberate care. Unlike the brash tourists, these professionals moved with precision and respect, fully aware of the significance of the role James played. A medic knelt beside him, gently examining the ropes binding him to the pole. "Are you injured?" she asked softly, her voice calm and reassuring. James shook his head slightly, maintaining his stoic demeanor even as he was finally freed. The ropes fell away, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he took a small step forward, flexing his arms subtly to restore circulation. As the medics tended to James, the rest of the squad sprang into action. Handcuffs clicked into place as the tourists were detained one by one. Each arrest was swift and efficient, carried out with professionalism that left no room for resistance. The man who had shoved the elderly woman muttered under his breath, protesting weakly about how it was just a bit of fun. But his words fell on deaf ears. The woman clutched her phone tightly, insisting she had done nothing wrong, while the others avoided eye contact altogether, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame and fear. The crowd watched intently, many people breaking into spontaneous applause as the officers restored order. Some cheered loudly, relieved to see justice being served, while others simply nodded in quiet satisfaction. Parents hugged their children closer, whispering explanations about why respect mattered and why actions always had consequences. The mood shifted dramatically, from tension and anger to relief and vindication, as the scene unfolded before them. Behind the scenes, communication buzzed between the officers and palace security. Reinforcements from the British Army were already en route, ensuring that not only would the immediate threat be neutralized, but also that the integrity of the Queen's Guard would be upheld moving forward. It was a coordinated effort, seamless and efficient, showcasing the dedication and discipline that defined those tasked with protecting the monarchy. Within minutes, the area was secured. The tourists were led away, their heads bowed in defeat, as the officers loaded them into the waiting vehicles. The crowd began to disperse slowly, though many lingered to express their gratitude to the police and offer words of encouragement to James. One young boy even handed him a small British flag he had been waving earlier, his innocent gesture speaking volumes about the admiration people felt for the steadfast guard. As the dust settled, James stood tall once more, his composure unshaken despite everything he had endured. Though his uniform bore slight creases from the ropes, his dignity remained intact. Around him, the hum of conversation returned, filled with reflections on what had just transpired. What started as a chaotic disruption had ended with a powerful reminder. Respect is non-negotiable, and those who dare to challenge it will face swift and decisive consequences. The fallout from the incident spread far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace, capturing headlines around the world. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. How a group of tourists had tied a royal guard to a pole for fun, only to face swift and decisive consequences. The narrative resonated deeply with audiences, sparking widespread outrage, but also admiration for Private James Whittaker's unwavering composure. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions, memes, and heartfelt messages, turning the event into a global conversation about respect, accountability, and cultural responsibility. For the tourists, life became an uphill battle almost immediately. Their names were released to the public as part of the legal proceedings, and within hours, their identities were plastered across news websites and social media feeds. Friends, family members, and even strangers bombarded them with calls, texts, and angry comments online. Employers back home scrambled to distance themselves, issuing statements condemning the behavior and severing ties where necessary. One of the men worked at a popular retail chain. By the end of the day, his employee profile had been removed from the company website. The woman, who ran a small travel blog, saw her followers plummet as people unfollowed her en masse, leaving scathing remarks in her comments section. Their court appearance only added fuel to the fire. Dressed in somber clothing and looking visibly shaken, the group stood before a judge who wasted no time emphasizing the severity of their actions. This was not mischief or harmless fun, the judge declared sternly. You disrespected not just one individual, but an institution that represents centuries of tradition and service. They were charged with multiple offenses, including public disorder, harassment, and conduct endangering the safety of a serviceman. Bail was denied, and they were remanded into custody until sentencing, a move that sent shockwaves through their families and communities. Public opinion remained firmly against them. Talk shows debated whether stricter penalties should be imposed on those who disrespect national symbols, while historians weighed in on the importance of safeguarding traditions like the Queen's Guard. Even late-night comedians joked about the incident, using humor to drive home the absurdity of their actions. Memes depicting the tourists being chased by palace guards went viral, further cementing their infamy. It seemed there was no escaping the backlash. They had become cautionary tales, examples of what happens when recklessness meets disrespect. Meanwhile, Private James Whittaker emerged as an unexpected hero. Media coverage painted him as the epitome of discipline and dignity, highlighting how he endured humiliation without compromising his duty. Interviews with former guards and military experts praised his restraint, calling it a testament to years of rigorous training and mental fortitude. Supporters rallied behind him, flooding social media with tributes and well wishes. Hashtags like #StandWithJames trended globally, accompanied by photos of fans posing with miniature bearskin hats or saluting in solidarity. James himself handled the attention with characteristic humility. In a rare public statement shared by the Ministry of Defense, he expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support, but redirected focus to the values he represented. I am proud to serve as a member of the Queen's Guard, the statement read. What happened was unfortunate, but it does not diminish my commitment to upholding the honor and traditions entrusted to me. His words struck a chord, reinforcing the idea that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in resilience. As days turned into weeks, the incident sparked broader discussions about tourism etiquette and cultural awareness. Travel agencies began incorporating lessons on respecting local customs into their pre-trip briefings, while embassies issued advisories reminding visitors of the importance of behaving responsibly abroad. Schools used the event as a teaching moment, encouraging students to reflect on empathy, accountability, and the impact of their actions on others. What had started as a reckless prank had inadvertently ignited meaningful conversations about how we treat each other and the institutions that shape our world. Despite the chaos and scrutiny, life slowly returned to normal for James. He resumed his duties outside Buckingham Palace, standing tall as ever, his presence now imbued with even greater significance. Tourists continued to gather around him, snapping photos and marveling at his stoicism, but something had changed. There was a newfound reverence in their gazes, a deeper understanding of the weight he carried, not just physically but symbolically. And though the scars of that day would always remain, they served as reminders of the enduring power of respect, tradition, and quiet courage. With the tourists now handcuffed and under arrest, the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace began to shift. The initial shock of the incident gave way to a mix of relief and lingering disbelief as people processed what they had just witnessed. Officers led the unruly group toward the waiting police van, their heads bowed in shame as the crowd watched silently. Some bystanders crossed their arms, glaring disapprovingly, while others shook their heads, muttering about how such behavior was unacceptable anywhere, let alone near one of the most iconic symbols of British tradition. Inside the van, the tourists sat hunched over, their drunken bravado replaced by sobering reality. The man who had shoved the elderly woman stared at the floor, his face pale and drawn. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, though no one responded. His words sounded hollow even to his own ears. The woman clutched her phone tightly, as if it might somehow shield her from the consequences of her actions. She glanced nervously at her companions, but none of them met her gaze. They were too busy replaying the events in their minds, realizing with growing dread that their fun prank could have far-reaching repercussions. Back outside, the commanding officer addressed the crowd briefly, thanking them for their patience and cooperation. "This is not reflective of our values," he said firmly, his voice carrying authority and reassurance. "We take incidents like this very seriously, and appropriate action will be taken." His words resonated deeply with those present, drawing nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. People began to applaud again, this time not out of excitement, but out of respect for the swift response and the professionalism displayed by the officers. It was a moment of unity, a collective acknowledgement that justice had been served. Meanwhile, Private James Whittaker stood quietly to the side, allowing medics to ensure he was unharmed. Though physically fine, he couldn't help but feel a weight pressing down on him. The ropes may have been removed, but the memory of being bound to the pole lingered. He thought about the countless hours of training he'd endured, the sacrifices he'd made, and the pride he felt in serving as part of the Queen's Guard. To see all of that mocked so carelessly stung more than he cared to admit. Yet, through it all, he remained composed, embodying the discipline that defined his role. As the officers finalized their work, journalists began arriving on the scene, eager to document the story. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions flew fast and furious. Witnesses recounted the events with vivid detail, some expressing anger, others admiration for James's unwavering composure. Social media was already ablaze with videos and photos of the incident, sparking debates across platforms about respect, accountability, and cultural sensitivity. Hashtags like #RespectTheGuard and #JusticeForJames trended within minutes, amplifying the global reach of the story. At the police station, the tourists faced harsh reality head-on. Stripped of their freedom and forced to confront the seriousness of their actions, they struggled to explain themselves. When questioned, their answers were disjointed and defensive, ranging from claims of ignorance, "We didn't know it was such a big deal," to outright denial, "It was just a joke." But excuses mattered little in the face of cold, hard facts. They were charged with public disorder, harassment, and conduct endangering the safety of a serviceman. Legal proceedings would follow, and the penalties promised to be severe. For James, the ordeal wasn't over yet. After ensuring he was fit to continue his duties, his superiors debriefed him privately. They praised his restraint and professionalism, emphasizing how his actions, or rather, his lack of reaction, had upheld the honor of the Queen's Guard. Still, they understood the emotional toll such incidents could take and assured him that support was available should he need it. James nodded gratefully, appreciating the gesture but determined to move forward without dwelling on the negativity. By evening, life around Buckingham Palace began returning to normal. The crowds thinned, replaced by a quieter, more reflective energy. Tourists resumed taking photos, children laughed as they chased pigeons, and street performers entertained passers-by once again. Yet the day's events left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed them. Conversations buzzed about the importance of respecting traditions and the courage required to stand firm in the face of disrespect. As James returned to his post later that afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the palace grounds, he noticed something different. A small group of visitors approached him, offering warm smiles and words of encouragement. One man saluted him respectfully, while a young girl handed him. The morning after the incident dawned crisp and clear, a gentle breeze rustling the flags that fluttered above Buckingham Palace. The palace grounds were alive with activity once more, as tourists from all corners of the globe gathered to catch a glimpse of history in motion. Among them stood Private James Whittaker, back at his post, resuming his role as a steadfast guardian of tradition. If anyone expected him to appear shaken or hesitant, they were mistaken. His posture was as impeccable as ever, his gaze steady and unwavering, and his demeanor radiated quiet confidence. To those who knew what had transpired, his presence felt even more powerful, a testament to resilience and unwavering duty. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the scene, a ripple of applause broke out among the crowd. It started softly, almost hesitantly, but quickly grew louder, echoing across the courtyard. Families clapped, children waved small British flags, and elderly visitors tipped their hats in admiration. Some approached cautiously, offering words of gratitude or simply nodding respectfully before stepping back. A young boy, no older than 8, stepped forward boldly, holding up a hand-drawn picture of James in full uniform. "Thank you for standing strong." The note read in colorful block letters. James didn't smile. He couldn't, but his eyes softened slightly, acknowledging the gesture with a subtle tilt of his head. It was enough to make the boy beam with pride. The incident had left an indelible mark on everyone involved, but perhaps none more so than the onlookers who had witnessed it firsthand. Conversations buzzed around the square, not just about the events of the previous day, but also about the lessons learned. Parents explained to their wide-eyed children why respect mattered, emphasizing how traditions like the Queen's Guard were symbols of unity and pride. Teachers visiting with school groups pointed to James as an example of discipline and composure, encouraging students to think about how their actions could impact others. Even seasoned travelers paused to reflect, vowing to approach future destinations with greater mindfulness and appreciation. For James, returning to his post carried a mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt immense relief that order had been restored and justice served. On the other, he couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened, the vulnerability he had felt, however briefly, and the knowledge that such incidents could happen again. Yet, he refused to let doubt take root. Instead, he drew strength from the overwhelming support he'd received, from his fellow guards, from strangers, and from people around the world who saw something worth protecting in the values he represented. Each clap of applause, each respectful nod, reinforced his belief in the importance of his role. Back at the barracks, his superiors commended him privately, praising his restraint and professionalism under extraordinary circumstances. They reminded him that moments like these tested not only individual character, but also the strength of the institution itself. "You didn't just represent yourself yesterday," one officer told him. "You represented every guard who has ever stood here, every soldier who has worn this uniform." And you did us proud. The words resonated deeply, filling James with renewed purpose. He knew his job wasn't easy. It required sacrifices most people couldn't imagine. But he also knew it was vital. Every hour spent on duty, every challenge endured, contributed to something far greater than himself. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to resonate globally. Documentaries explored the role of the Queen's Guard in modern society, while opinion pieces debated the balance between humor and respect in public spaces. Schools incorporated the incident into lessons on cultural sensitivity, using it as a case study to teach students about accountability and empathy. Meanwhile, hashtags like #RespectTheGuard remained active, evolving into movements aimed at promoting awareness and understanding among travelers. For the tourists involved, the consequences lingered long after their court appearances ended. Their names became synonymous with recklessness, serving as cautionary tales for anyone tempted to cross boundaries in the name of fun. But for James, and for countless others inspired by his quiet courage, the incident became a turning point. It reminded the world that traditions endure not because they are untouchable, but because there are individuals willing to stand firm in their defense. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light over the palace gates, James stood tall, embodying the very essence of honor and resilience. Around him, life moved forward, vibrant and hopeful. The chaos of the past had given way to clarity. Respect is earned through action, and dignity prevails when upheld with unwavering resolve.